First of all, Namaste.
Pranam, sir.
Welcome to this discussion. Let me chant the mantra, the Shanti mantra of one of the Upanishads, and then we proceed. It's my favorite mantra, which is Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamaduchyate Purnasya Purnamataya Purnameva Vasishyate. So, the subject today is interesting. Quantum something. What is that? Quantum
world.
Quantum world and the Upanishads, right? So the problem is Upanishads, yes. Quantum world, I'm not so sure. So you give me the quantum world, I give you the Upanishads. And let's see if there is a meeting point among them. Like we have to decide whether Upanishad is a particle or a wave. So let's so talk to me, say something so that I can understand what you're trying to discuss, and then we can carry on.
Sure. Firstly, thank you so much, sir. It's really a privilege and an opportunity to be able to do this.
Thank you.
And let me start with a disclaimer. I am a complete novice as far as quantum, both quantum as well as Upanishads are concerned. So I rely on your grace to take this session forward. Having said that, there's been, when we talk about science by itself is understanding physical and natural world through observation and experimentation. And I believe there is parallel in our Vedic thought also in that same way. And even and when we go into specifically quantum science or the quantum world, the founding fathers, many of them, be it Schrödinger or Einstein or Niels Bohr or Heisenberg, your favorite, whom you have quoted the uncertainty principle several times, several of them have acknowledged their, going to the Vedas and the Upanishads to get clarity as far as the quantum world is concerned. So this is the inspiration to see if we can derive, or at least I can derive some more clarity based on this discussion. And when I look at the Vedas and the science started from classical mechanics, like from Newtonian science, and went on to quantum. Whereas if we look at the Vedas, they started with the Hindu spirituality. It started with the Vedas, then the Upanishads, Vedanta, various granthas, and then down to your Itihasas, Puranas, Bhagavatam, etc. And if we look at the Puranas and Bhagavatam and Itihasas, they are, I would liken them, if they can be so said, to the classical science where people can understand, relate to, etc. And perhaps Vedas can be equated to the quantum science where it's not so easy to understand and relate to for the normal person. And so these two streams are coming at the same thing, where we are starting from the quantum and coming to the classical, and whereas here we are trying to determine the quantum. So the idea is, okay, can we so therefore get more meaning from the quantum, on the quantum, from a study of the Vedas and the Upanishads, which seem to have started from there, or at least that's my perception. So
let me put it this way. What you are saying is, in science, from Newtonian physics, we have gone on and come to quantum theories and quantum physics and so on. Please, we can still say quantum theories because things are still quite uncertain, like Heisenberg said, but a certain amount of understanding, right? And what you're trying to say also is that while in the Vedas, it seems the Upanishads, which are the essence of the Upanishad, of the Vedas, they start with something close to quantum. And then you come to the practicals of these philosophies of Sankhya and Yoga and so on. And then from there you come to the Itihasas and the Puranas and the Bhagavatam and so on, which is all part of the same, the Agamas. Now the thing is, from the point of view of the Upanishads, or from the point of view of the study of the ancient science of inner understanding, let me put it that way, it starts from the universal and comes down to the particular. I'm using some term, my own terms. Here, in our physics and our earth sciences, we start from the particular, we are going to the universal, which is quantum physics. Universal. Actually, the reason probably is because in the Vedas and the Upanishads, most of the things which the rishis describe are intuitive. They go beyond the ordinary understanding. It's intuitive. So it starts from there, and the truths they have discovered through the intuitive process. When I'll explain that intuitive process, that doesn't mean that it is a mysterious thing. Because of that, they are trying to describe it in ordinary terms, and then from there comes the more concrete principles of Itihasas and Puranas. It's interesting, even if you go to the Puranas, the essence of the Puranas happens to be the Upanishad. Even the Bhagavad, which is so much like a story, the aim of the Bhagavad is to discover, which is repeated in it again and again and again, including the Purusha Sukta, which is repeated many times, saying that the essence is to find out the truth which is within. Yes. So it's not as if it's totally lost. It is a way of expressing and making the common man understand the truth. Now, if you go to a Newtonian physicist or a schoolboy who is studying Newtonian physics, every action has an equal and opposite reaction and so on. And if you tell him about quantum, it is very difficult to understand. So what the Puranas are trying to say is somewhat like trying to make the person understand first that there are certain things which are beyond the grasp of what we call the ordinary reasoning, which is 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. In this field, it may be different. It may be do or do punch.
Yes.
You know what I'm trying to say? So, this, even though the Puranas and the Itihasas and the Yoga Sutras and so on, they try, and the Agamas describe things in practical terms, but there is a built-in understanding that this is the way to teach you something which is beyond your limited thinking, which is based on the sense organs.
Yes.
So that's why we see this difference. In that, the approach is this way, in this, the approach is that way. But they do meet at a certain point. You mentioned some scientists who said that those who understand, though you cannot really understand quantum physics.
Yes.
Feynman. And yet,
Feynman, Richard Feynman.
Richard Feynman, right. So, Richard Feynman said this in which year? Could be roughly?
In the 1920s or 30s or something like that, yeah.
Right. And when was the Kena Upanishad? Probably written much later, but when was it being understood and studied? 1,000 years at a very conservative estimate.
Yes.
There the Rishi says two things, which is very similar to what this man said, this great scientist said. He is talking about the supreme reality, while this scientist is talking about the smallest unit of energy, which is quantum. Right? Quantum is what? Quantity.
Yeah.
The smallest quantity or the smallest energy unit possible, let's put it this way.
Yes.
Which cannot be. So he's talking about that. The Rishi is talking about that which is the smallest of the smallest and the biggest of the biggest, which is the supreme reality. But the funny thing is, not funny thing, the strange thing is, they express it almost in the same terms.
Yes.
The Rishi in the Kena Upanishad says, Na vidmo na vijanimo yatha anushis. I cannot understand, I cannot grasp how to teach this to you because it seems almost impossible to understand. And the Upanishad itself says,
He who knows knows not, and he who knows not knows. So when the scientist said that it is not possible to understand quantum physics, he was not saying don't study quantum physics. He was only trying to warn you that it will not fit into your normal course of understanding. It's something beyond. Yeah, continue.
Since we are on that, let me just quote him verbatim. He said, I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. And this is from a person who was involved in the Manhattan Project, was considered one of the foremost thinkers of the time, and considered almost an authority on the subject. And that's what he says.
Right.
So I'm going to move on to another favorite topic on this, and which is probably the central mystery of quantum mechanics. And I will introduce that by talking about duality. Now, this reminds me of our time in Vrindavan when we spoke about in Bhagavatam. Several times it comes, he who is beyond the opposites, and going. Whereas in our regular life, we are always talking in dual terms: good or bad, destiny or free will, or
Right.
so on and so forth. And in science terms, that is represented as particle or wave, as in something is either matter or it is energy. Anything that has mass is a particle, and a wave is essentially a propagation of energy in a medium. So everything is.
Let me put it this way. When you say quantum unit, generally the example taken is of an electron.
Yes.
Now, an electron is a charge, basically. It's a charge. I don't think anyone can ever see it, but if you see from the reactions and what it represents, there is mostly space.
Yes.
And there is only a charge. Right. Now this electron, when you think it's a wave, but it can behave like a particle. It can also behave like a wave. So nobody knows whether it's really a particle or a wave. Nobody really knows.
We can only, depending on the reactions in the reactor, because you can't see it even with an electron microscope. Only molecules can. So you can only guess and understand the action of this unit, quantum unit, through reactions.
Yes.
Through the reactor, let's put it this way.
Yes.
Through the magnetic field.
Yes.
Okay. What I'm trying to say is, it is the same with the supreme Brahman, which is described in Upanishad. Nobody can put it in a test tube and say how it is going to behave tomorrow.
Yes.
Or now, or the next minute, or the next second. It's a charge.
Yes.
It may not be a negative charge like the electron, but it is a charge.
Yes.
It's a point of energy. And no one can define how it can work or what, which is why it is called the undefinable. Yan manasana manyute yanahur mano matam, that which even the mind cannot understand. Here, the mind meaning the Newtonian mind, which thinks only in 3 dimensions. It cannot think of any other dimension.
Yes.
So let me tell you a little story. Imagine this is that there is a box which has a transparent box which has a division in the middle, which is also transparent. Top is open, and in the side of the compartment there are little green discs, green colored discs, and also some red colored discs. There are more red colored discs on this side and less on this side. Here there are more green. Now they are wafer thin, which means what I am trying to say is that these discs have no idea about a third dimension, which is called height or depth, whatever you want, or thickness, or whatever you want. They know only 2 dimensions. They are wafer thin. Either this way or that way. This way they cannot think of. Just imagine.
Yes.
It's an illustration. Like you can't describe, but it's an illustration. Now, these green ones looking across the transparent partitions see the red ones are really enjoying themselves, some people. But they want to go there. Some have gone. Most of them haven't gone. They want to go there. And they are trying all the things possible to get there. But they have no understanding that there is something called height. That you can jump up and push the side. They know only this movement. So, human beings generally who are trying to touch that which is beyond their 3 dimensions. Here it is 3 dimensions.
Do not know that there could be a 4th dimension. Okay. Now this green disc, even if I, as a human being,
who knows about the third, I want to take all these 4 greens and put them here. But I am not able to catch them because they are always moving this way, that way restlessly. Because they are thinking they can solve the problem through 2 dimensions. If only they could say, this is not possible through these dimensions. Okay? This is not something which can be grasped. And if they settle down and contemplate, then they will be at least for a second motionless. So I who know this dimension can lift them up and put them this side. They are moving only this way. Now, this is the problem in Vedanta. We want to get out. We all know we want to be free. But we don't know that in the dimensions in which we operate, this is not possible. And the dimension in which we operate is the dimension of the senses, which themselves mislead us. First, either they are incomplete, the data, or sometimes even completely wrong. So, all the ideas we build of being trapped and wanting to come out of the trap are all built up in these 3-dimensional ideas of the data, imperfect data that is fed into us through the senses, because they are themselves imperfect. Right?
Yes.
So, through that, no solution can ever come. Solution starts even a little bit when one understands, no, this is not the way. This is not the way. There must be something outside the data provided by the senses. How do we get there? You cannot get there. When you stop running, then you probably touch a little bit. You see, normally when I say I want moksha, I think moksha is like some object which I desire, a pile of gold which I desire. So the gold is here and I am here and I am going towards it, right?
Yes.
Right. This is the normal mode of acquiring that gold. What if what I am looking for is here, there and everywhere? How do I go there? See, it's not a linear acquiring.
Yes.
It's not linear. It's everywhere. It's Isha Vashyamidam Sarvam. Okay. So, where am I in this process? So then, when I understand this perfectly, clearly, and say that this moment is not going to help me. So when all grasping, all movement, all acquiring, everything comes to an end because I realize this is not the solution. In that silence, perhaps, it is there. I don't know, I'm trying my best. It's like quantum. Sometimes it's difficult to say what we are trying to do.
Yes.
And my hope is that when you touch that, you will also understand what they mean by quantum. Because it is a unit of energy. Or whatever you want to call it. It is the smallest unit. In that unit is the whole universe. There is not a single place in the universe where this unit is not there. And I don't know, you must be knowing, I want you to explain it to me. There is one principle in quantum, I'm not sure, I'm not a quantum physicist, but with tuning in other quantum physicists' brains and so on, there's something which says that when one quantum unit, a reaction happens, it is reflected equally in the other.
Yes.
I don't know if you have checked this out. So if what happens here is reflected equally to that which is not here but somewhere else, isn't it that it is everywhere? I don't know. I'm just.
No, it's absolutely right, and the phenomenon is called quantum entanglement, and the idea is that there can be two quantum particles, or even more than two quantum particles, can get entangled, and when they get entangled, by measuring one, we can know the state of the other, right?
Exactly. So what have they been saying for hundreds and thousands of years? You measure one and you have found everything. The whole thing rests in each one. Each one. You find the each one and you have found the whole. WHOLE whole.
Yeah.
Similar, of course, to that big hole up there, but
yes,
dark hole.
Yes. In fact, practically, I mean, quantum computing, which is now really picking up steam, is based on that principle, wherein, because we really cannot measure what's happening at the quantum level. I mean, I was actually planning to have this at the end, part of the discussion, but anyway, that's okay.
In the same way, you cannot really measure what is happening when the mind is absolutely quiet and is beyond the senses. Nobody can measure. Because it cannot be measured, the Newtonian physicists cannot say it doesn't exist. If quantum can exist, this can also exist.
Yes.
Because you cannot take it in your hands, you cannot say something does not exist.
Yes.
We have to revise our idea of existence.
Absolutely. And I want to bring in, I mean, going back to our wave-particle duality.
Interesting. What?
Going back to our wave-particle duality that we were talking about, and you mentioned the electron. So I just wanted to take a minute to talk about an experiment and how weird things get. So there is this experiment to determine whether an electron is a wave or a particle. You fire electrons. It's called the double slit experiment.
Right.
So you fire an electron beam at a board which has two thin slits, and then you observe what is the how it falls on the wall at the back or the screen at the back. And when you have behind the curtain, So when there is a single slit, it behaves like a particle, and you have a band at the back.
Right.
When you have a double slit, it becomes a wave. And then there's an interference pattern at the back. Okay?
Right.
And so what people did, now with sophisticated instruments, you could say that, the electrons are all bouncing off each other and creating a wave. So they fired one electron by one electron. But nevertheless, still, at the end of it, it became an interference pattern at the back.
Right.
So what logically, or with our current paradigm, it implies is the electron is going through both the slits at the same time and interfering with itself, right? So,
Correct.
So that totally demolishes anything that we know about reality as it is, just right there. And this is a phenomenon that can be observed. Yes.
Yes. So I'm saying that any new discovery that has been made anywhere, even in Newtonian physics, physical science, came about only when people had a doubt. So one should begin with doubt. All I'm trying to say is that the journey is as important as the goal. So when you start the journey saying, when I say doubt, what I mean is not this man who's always in doubt, not that. What I'm trying to say, when I start the journey, if I say, perhaps in my ordinary brain, my ordinary ways of thinking that comes from this brain, there may not be a methodology to figure out what the ultimate is all about. But if there is an ultimate, there may be other ways of figuring it out which may be completely free of the ordinary modes of thinking.
Yes.
I hope you get what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's so frustrating to tell this to somebody. They say, oh yeah, no. But the fact is, if you can suspend your belief in your particular capacity, which you think is great, if you can suspend your belief in that, then you begin to see that there is a chance for your horizon to expand. Having said that, I also want to tell you, this kind of approach to finding the truth, which we normally do through linear approach. It is there, I have to reach there, I have to find out, and so on. That approach itself needs to be revised a bit. There's one, I want to tell you something interesting. Look, we don't look at the world actually. We look at only the impressions that the senses give of the world. We actually don't know what the world is.
Yes.
What we know is the image and the impressions that we get through our limited sense organs of the world of objects before us.
Yes.
That's all we know.
Yes.
We actually don't know how it is. And as I've been saying many times, I've been saying this, creatures with other set of sensory organs and other ways of thinking also, other kinds of brains, may be looking at the same thing which we think is one thing as another thing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So what is it actually? See, like Alexander Pope, the great poet, said, the difference is as great between the optic seeing as the object seeing. So there are numerous optics and therefore numerous views of the object. So what is that object really? This is like saying, I think a quantum unit is a wave, but it turns out to be a particle. I think it's a particle, it turns out to be, I'm not sure. Why? Because I'm using my ordinary mode of thought. Yeah. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu made a nice statement, which is not like this, but quite you can understand the parallel. He said, the Supreme Being can be with form or without form at the same time. Somebody said, how is this possible? Either it has to be with form or without form. He said, if you say it is not possible, then you are not talking about an absolute, you are talking about a conditioned thing. A conditioned thing cannot be with form or without form at the same time. It has to be either with form or without form.
Yes.
So if you want to prove it that way, then it's not possible, because then you're talking about an entity which you can measure with your ordinary mode of thought, which may be beyond your ordinary mode of thought.
Yes.
Or maybe with form and without form at the same time.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So scientists who have studied about the advanced physics should try and make a link there somewhere, that these are not things which are easily understood by the conditioned thinking of our brain. Now, having come there, I have to also say that the whole the process of yogic understanding, not Vedanta, leave Vedanta now, come to yoga. The understanding that apart from the ordinary brain which we use and the limited number of centers of the brain which we are using, there are unlimited number of centers which are not used. The whole process of yoga is to develop these centers which are not normally active, because we don't need it. We have a frontal lobe civilization. All that you have is right there. There are other systems inside the brain, which is why there is new thing called Neuro Theologies, which says that the brain, the nervous system of the human being is wired for a spiritual experience. Whether you have it or not depends on what you know about it. Which means, now then, that part would start functioning not through the sense organs, but through other centers. To give you an example, last time we had a discussion on consciousness. Now the normal idea is consciousness is confined to the brain. Or rather that consciousness is a product of the brain. I am saying that even things in this universe which do not have brains, as we have developed brains, also have consciousness and intelligence. Right. Now that consciousness and intelligence is also there in our brain.
Yes.
Also. But we are so caught up with this other brain, which thinks that consciousness is a product of the brain, that we are not able to tap that because we think we can solve everything through this.
Yes.
I'm not saying, I'm not forming any conclusions.
Yes.
Because if I say I know, then I don't know. Like that quantum physicist said, Upanishad also says, he who knows, knows not, and he who knows not knows. So, why? Because there are parts of our even physical body and physical nerves, the brain cells, which have functions other than the functions that we are likely to perform every day. If we can tap that, then you might be able to open up a window to something extraordinary and completely different.
Sure.
The whole process of meditation is to untrammel the mind from its engagement with the ordinary. When you do that, you discover that consciousness works through the human brain in the best way possible in the world, but still limited. And that this consciousness is not a product of the brain, but makes use of the wonderfully complex brain of the human being, without which we cannot talk even this.
Yes.
I'm not discounting the power of the brain, it's great. I'm only saying that the consciousness is not its product, but the consciousness can make good use of this excellent instrument.
Agreed. So just to add to that, in terms of, you mentioned that consciousness is not limited to animate things or life as such, but everywhere. So going back to that double slit experiment, things get a little more interesting when we add an observer. Now, so what happened is that you fire an electron and then it still gives a wave pattern or an interference pattern. So the scientists or people wanted to know, okay, let's see which slit it goes through, or does it really go through both the slits? So they put detectors or sensors in a slit to figure out where it went. And when we try to determine that, it starts behaving like a particle. The wave interference pattern no longer exists, and only the particle band exists. So the result of the experiment or the observation or the fact that you're observing seems to change the behavior of the thing or the electron or any quantum object. That is one of the most perplexing things that people still have not been able to resolve.
In fact, David Bohm was firmly, I think, of the opinion that it depends on the observer. Well, there were not many people who agree with him, not even today. But so yes, if I put it this way, I may not be a scientist, I may not be a great Vedantic, but from my understanding, if I put it this way, both are important, the observer as well as that which is being observed, because that which is being observed is basically the observer itself. See, I have to say, like the Upanishads say, na vidmo na vijani mo yathet. I don't know how to make you understand this. So So let's put it that way. Let's make it little practical. People are very practical nowadays. I'm saying if the brain becomes extraordinarily quiet, then it is not interfering in the observation.
Mm-hmm.
When it is not interfering in observation, then you actually see what that unit is all about.
Yes.
Because you're not interfering. And when you see what the unit is, now this is dogma, what I'm going to say. The Upanishads say that unit is all-pervading. Then I cannot prove to you. You need to find that unit. Which
Yes.
means every unit, everywhere, is part of the whole. It's not different.
Mm.
And therefore, what happens here will happen there also.
Yes. Yeah, which is why no discussion on quantum physics cannot not touch on the topic of consciousness. It's not.
Yeah, but people don't like that word. The strictly so-called physicists don't like the word consciousness because they have this, not all, many of them have this feeling that consciousness is a product of the brain. I am saying no. Indeed, the brain works with the consciousness, no question about that. Without consciousness, I am saying is, without consciousness, the brain cannot work. That's what I am trying to say.
Yes.
And instead of being a product of the brain, the brain, I would say, if you compare, is like a very complex computer, great computer. But I and you who are sitting and operating computer is the consciousness.
Correct.
Otherwise, you can do many things. Nobody is aware of what's going on. I leave this computer here and I put on a video and I go out. Many things are happening. Nobody is observing.
Yes.
Who is the observer? Me.
Yes.
That element is consciousness.
Yes. So without the observer, it is as good as a stone. Like, yes.
Absolutely. Now, beyond that, one more thing is that is not only the neurons in the brain which are conscious. Even the ordinary cells of the human body are conscious.
Yes.
Each cell is conscious. It repairs itself. It fights when viruses attack. Still learning to fight COVID, but it does. So it has its own. The brain is not giving any commands to that. No. So I'm saying every unit, including what we think is non-animate, what do you call it? Unanimate or
inanimate, yes.
Inanimate. Even that I'm saying has a unit of intelligence in it. It may not be like the intelligence that is processed through the human brain, but it has its own primitive intelligence. And it operates. You know that when chemical changes take place, an electron jumps from one to the other. One shell to another.
Yes.
And then it becomes another element because it has more number of electrons going around. Who dictates that? Nobody does. It has its own innate intelligence. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
And also I'm trying to say that innate intelligence is no different from the intelligence in us. Although, because our brain is such an advanced computer, we tend to think that we are different and greater than other intelligence. No. Say.
Okay. So now, can we talk about? So this is very related. The thing called superpositions. In quantum terminology. So, like when we take this same example of an electron and two slits, so there are a variety of possibilities. It goes through one slit, it goes through the other, or it goes through both, or it goes through neither. Now, until we measure it, even the screen or the interference pattern is a measurement because we try to figure out what it is.
Right.
So
you can't see it, you can only measure it.
Yes. Until we measure it, we have what is called a variety of superpositions or positions it can be. It can be here, there, or anywhere. So it is. Yes, and that is described by the wave function, or what Schrodinger wrote. And Schrodinger himself is, really, he has acknowledged that he got a lot of clarity about quantum physics by studying Upanishads and Vedanta. He's actually on the chair. He was on the chair of the Allahabad University also in Chennai, in India, because of its association with Indian thought. But the Schrodinger wave equation essentially determines what are all the possibilities. So, from a classical deterministic view in classical science, we go into probabilistic view in quantum science, and all the superpositions are essentially possible. Anything that can happen, happens is basically a way to say it, but only when you measure it, that wave function collapses and you see only one particular outcome.
Right.
Right. So that is the
Right.
concept of superpositions. I just thought I will put that out to see how, and that we can see. Yeah, go ahead. Sir.
See, this is what I'm also trying to say in a different way, that based on the reaction, you see one position.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but that is the based on the reaction that we can see, we see one position.
Yeah.
But it has innumerable possibilities.
Yes.
You cannot define and say this is the only position possible. I don't think even any scientist would say that it's possible. No. So if it has innumerable positionings, what we are trying to say, that it is an all-pervading positioning. It's a thing that doesn't stay but always moves.
Yes.
In fact, the whole world, universe is called Jagat because it is Jagatyam, always moving. Right? So I see quite a correlation between the physics, advanced physics, quantum physics thought processes. I'm not saying they are the same, but very similar, and the Upanishadic thought processes. What makes you wonder is before the invention of the reactors and all these things where you can actually see a unit, quantum unit behaving in different ways through a magnetic field and so on to find out how did these guys in the Upanishadic period understand this? At least to some extent, let's not say totally, at least.
Yes.
How? What was the process which made them understand? So I'm saying that while great experiments in physics are fine, it should be there. Then only people will agree and understand only if there is proof from quantum physics and so on. We must also understand that we possess an organism which can reach this even without instruments or magnetic fields. And the key to this is to be quiet, totally quiet and free of all the impressions that we carry, all the rubbish that we load ourselves with. If at some point if we can really, and also the attempt to grasp not only physical things but also the ultimate reality. Imagine a limited being trying to, it doesn't work. Can you understand this? Then what happens? If I use the words of Patanjali, the meditator, and what he is meditating upon, and meditation become same. There is no meditator. There is only meditation. Here, that meditator is none other than the pure observer. There is nothing else happening out there. It is because of this observer that other things are behaving in strange ways.
Yes.
So the observer is most important. Since most human beings do not have access to laboratories and quantum physics laboratories and so on, I'm saying one need not worry, we can do it without that in ourselves. We need to understand that ultimate reality is when the brain is quiet of all its cares and worries and tensions and conflicts, tension among two sides pulling each other. When all that is understood to be the cause of our not being able to be freely looking at things, then
they cease.
Because you don't want it. When that happens, in that quietness, perhaps you see or understand the consciousness which functions through our brain. And that is not the brain. That's what I'm trying to say.
So, I'm going to ask you this. Some time ago I was recently listening to a video of yours where you talked about yoga in Melbourne, if I remember right, just the other day. And you were talking about the vrittis in the brain and likening them to the waves, right? So if we are talking about waves now, can you expound a little bit on thought? What is thought really? Is it a wave? And if so, and is it really about aligning, when we are talking about meditation, are we aligning this wave with some other wave, or so that the amplitude of the crest is different, or whatever?
Wait a minute. Just as you cannot say that a quantum unit is a wave or a particle, we cannot say whether thought is a wave or a particle. We also cannot say. If this is understood,
then you see, let me put it another way. There's no physics in this. We're looking at it in a very practical, simple way.
Anyway, I'm not a physicist, so I can't. The thought process which we have, it looks continuous. From our birth till our death, it is going on like a chain. Even in dream, it is going on. Deep sleep is probably going on inside, but I'm not aware of it. Waking, it is always going on. From childhood till I probably croak, it's going on. And it's like one continuous link. We are wondering, why is this going on? If you look carefully, it is not a continuous chain. The only example it gives is the old film projector. The actual projector is to have one action, but just to move your hand like this, you have to have many slides. If you take out the film and look, now so everything is digital. If you take out the film and look, then you will see that to raise the hand, there are at least 6 or 7 frames. One is like this, then it is like this, then it is like this, then it is. But when it is played on a certain speed in the projector, it appears in the screen to be a continuous action. I am saying, my understanding, I am saying, that so is every thought in our mind. This whole chain is actually a construction of links, small links put together. Now, if that is so, it must be that one thought is coming and going away and another is replacing it. If it is so, let's say if it is so, I know, but I am saying for discussion's sake. So, one thought is coming. But the link between the thought that went and the thought that is coming and has now come is so infinitesimally small that we are not able to grasp it. Since you are discussing about thought, that's what I am saying. So if we understand this, what we are discussing just now, and say perhaps there is a gap which is so small that I can't see it, and yet I am going to watch to see if the gap can be found. If we begin to think on these lines, is there a practical way? There are some practical exercises described in certain, but I don't know, but the practical way described is as soon as a thought comes, cut it off. Don't let it. Now then immediately another is propped up like grass, cut it. Keep cutting, not letting a single thought stay. Suddenly in between, they say, Iti Shushrama Purvesham, so say the ancient. Sometimes when suddenly you find that everything is cut and there is only the gap. You see the gap and you know the origin of thought, where is it coming?
Hmm.
But you try to tell it to somebody, you cannot explain it because they are caught in this form of thought.
Hmm. Sure.
So what I'm trying to say is that there is, if you touch that gap, so that now when you touch the gap, people who have touched that gap say that the gap is the only reality. All these chains and links are just temporary things.
Hmm.
The only reality is that gap.
Hmm.
And the human brain is not developed even today enough to define it. Maybe in some future evolution it may become evolved enough to understand this.
Hmm.
At the moment, no. Theoretically, yes. Practically, no. Yeah. So is there no possibility of touching it? Yes. When you understand that it is not possible.
Okay. So, yes. So
There
what?
is total rest here.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, what I was going to ask is the leading into what is called the measurement problem or the paradox, where in quantum science, where when you measure something, you are disturbing the system. So therefore, that is no longer
Say that again. Say that again.
when we measure something.
Yeah, you are disturbing the system.
We are
Correct.
disturbing the system. So we have changed the state of the system, and whatever.
Yes.
So if we take the wave in quantum science, everything goes by the wave equation, and what are the possibilities? So until you measure it, there are so many superpositions possible.
Right.
And then once you have measured it, you have changed it, and then the future course is dependent on that measurement, and from there on, only the possibilities are done. So, so then, is this measurement our act of judgment, or if we are suspending judgment, are we not measuring? Just to draw some parallel.
Not only judgment, it is our looking at things only in the way of the images that we get through our sense organs. That is the measurement. We measure it only with the data that is available to us. That itself is a mischief.
But how else to measure it? Or is the act of measuring?
Measure it.
No need.
Stop measuring.
Okay. Okay.
Stop measuring. Be.
Yes. Okay.
So now, when we are sitting down and talking to each other, at some point you may feel something, right? I think I know, I can grasp it. But then it goes off because it can. So,
yes. Okay.
whole process of dialogue is meant for that.
Okay.
Dialogue is not meant to prove a point. Dialogue is to make the brain understand its limitations. That is the function. People have other interpretations of dialogue to find a solution, to solve the problem. I say that the dialogue, the function, the primary function of a real dialogue, samvad in Sanskrit, is to understand that it is not possible to understand given the limited inputs that we have. Then the dialogue is moving.
Okay.
Otherwise the dialogue is stuck in trying to prove. And the other guy who is part of the dialogue is trying to disprove. It's not a samvad anymore.
Yes.
It's a monologue disguised as a dialogue.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure. So
silence.
Yeah. So I'd like to move on to the next part, which is we touched upon it briefly about entanglement of how everything is connected, and today we are able to measure this even in natural events like earthquakes. There are a lot of papers written where there are aftershocks after the earthquake, and they say that is because of a quantum entanglement that occurs, and that memory of that initial earthquake is pervading.
I'm sure.
And in a similar way, when earthquakes occur, apparently there is some phenomena called dark lightning, where lightning it's not, and so on and so forth. So these are things that are happening at a macro level too. It's not just or visible at the macro level too. And also this whole thing is a matter of scale, right? So if we look at the size of the Milky Way, we are quantum in that context.
Right.
So
first we have to realize that. First we have to see what happens. When I see that I am smaller than even the small, that I am like a quantum unit in this entire universe, what happens then? My humility really becomes serious. I'm not, see, this human being who is like one quantum, maybe smaller than that, and a quantum unit, it thinks that this whole universe is rotating in his head, that he is the king of it. So when he realizes that he's that smallest of unit which cannot even be measured properly, then what happens? Then he begins to actually start the exploring of life. And then, when this is understood, when this unit is understood, then this whole world is understood. Because like you said, the other phenomenon of an earthquake causing other reactions outside world, in the same way, one little action in this unit can reflect the whole universe. In the Gita, Krishna suddenly appears to Arjuna as Vishwaswarupa. Though it has been nicely given us with 1,000 heads of gods, this, that and all, artistically, poetic license. But what I think happened, what happened was, Krishna was showing Arjuna that this unit which is me, which is also the same unit there, but you don't know, I know, reflects the entire universe. It's not different. We see the word used, Vishwa Rupa Darshana. World, how do we say? Vishwa is universe.
Yeah.
Seeing the universe in the unit. But only in that special unit it could be seen. And he is trying to goad Arjuna along to say that you are also the special unit man at some point.
Yes.
All linked.
True. So there's another going back to, I don't know how much more time we have, but I'm going to continue until you say stop. So, but there are.
We'll have a few more minutes.
Okay.
It's almost an hour, I think now.
Yes, sir. So
5 minutes we can.
All right. So I'll quickly talk about two things.
Simple.
Yeah. So going back to a double slit experiment where we put an observer and then try to do this. Now, and combining this concept of entanglement. So what physicists try to do is there's this thing called the delayed quantum eraser experiment. Fundamentally, what they're trying to do is they fired two electrons which are entangled, and they measured one. But they measured one after the first one went and hit the screen. So one will go through the double slit, and the other would go and be measured as to see which one went. So the measurement is done later. However, depending on, so sometimes they measured and sometimes they did not. So they would keep firing electrons, entangled electrons. Sometimes they would measure, sometimes they wouldn't. And the measurement of the path would happen later. It will not happen before it was. So they found that the particle, the electron, one that actually impinges on, goes through the double slit, behaves as a particle or a wave depending on whether we measure or not, even in that case. What this essentially means is, since the measurement is happening post the fact of this occurring, it is going back in time, or so it seems, and the behavior of this, and this electron is behaving that way back in time. So, and that's why there is a lot of science fiction around time travel and all that, but I don't know what this means, so I just thought I'll post it out there.
It simply means that time is a brain concept. Time is a completely brain-directed and brain-operated concept. The moment you are free of the limitations of the brain, there is no time. And only when there is time, then there is speed of time and this and that. Einstein would be very unhappy. Nothing can travel faster than light. We are saying yes, but that is when time is working.
Yes.
When time is not working, something could be faster. So, the gap which we discussed about thought, just see this. This gap is actually moving beyond time because the thought that is coming, so there is time. The thought that is going into the past, is there also time? Past, memory.
Yes.
The present cannot be measured. So, the more you stay in the present and not go into the past, because future is only a projection, there is no, we don't know. Then you go closer and closer to something which could be called timelessness. And when you touch timelessness, then perhaps you have some idea what light is all about.
What light is all about?
All about. Because you see the speed of light. Speed.
Yes.
Speed comes only with time. You can't have speed when time. Okay?
Correct.
So you are suddenly in a timelessness. And that timelessness is the original essence. This is not in physics, please, I am saying. That timeless is the original essence of light. All I am trying to say that there is the link between timelessness and light. Timelessness is light, which is not there in physics, but I am saying. If you touch that gap called timelessness, then you see the real essence of what light is all about.
Okay. So I'm going to make a leap here and taking off from what you're saying. So basically, even
Stop. We have only a few more minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. So what we're saying is that even light, what we see as light, is basically a visible spectrum of the electromagnetic radiation overall. Correct?
Right.
So what if we say that electromagnetic radiation exists? It exists all the time. So that in itself doesn't have time, right? So
So in different ways.
In different ways, yes, probably, which I possibly do not have an understanding of. But so perhaps in that sense, whatever, and then if we connect that to our existence is defined by our thought, at least as we see it today. And thought, if it can be considered as some kind of a wave, and if that is also an it's again a sort of a vortex within that electromagnetic flux or field, so to say. Perhaps.
So, basically it's a vortex. Right? Therefore, the essence of it cannot be read by the ordinary understanding. It needs to go beyond the ordinary mode of thought. And therefore, when the Upanishad says, Yan manasa namanyute, that which the mind cannot grasp, ordinary mind, brain mind, cannot grasp. Yan manasa namanyute, elahur mano matam, but because of which thought has the capacity to sprout, Or consciousness. Not thought, but consciousness. That is what. So, en manasa namanjite, enahur manomatam, the source of Tadeva Brahmatvam Vidhi, understand, O student, that alone is the Brahman, the truth, which again is from the root Bru, which means expand. Tadeva Brahmam Tvam Vidhi, you understand. Nedam yat idam upasate, nothing that you worship here. Now, when you say nothing that you worship here, it need not be the process of worshipping. It means what do you worship, what you admire. Nothing that you admire here.
It's beyond that.
It's not anything that you can admire here, it's much more than that. You worship what you think is wealthy or great or big. They're saying it's worthless, there's no point. Nothing that you worship here is of any use. What is of use is the understanding that that which you seek, if you are really seeking in the Vedantic manner, is beyond the ken of the ordinary mind, which is caught in its time-space business. So, that is the food for thought. Can we sometimes sit quietly and say, yes, okay, without forming conclusions, you know what I mean?
Yes.
People are quick to form conclusions. I know that hundreds of people here listening to this matter immediately say, oh, Krishnamurti said there, or somebody said there. Conclusion. We want to justify and conclude, but can we live without conclusions? Without deciding if the unit is a wave or a particle, can we leave it there? Then perhaps there is a way, perhaps there is some way of finding out.
It's actually wonderful if we leave it, because the possibilities become endless.
Endless.
Yes.
So we leave it at that.
Okay.
For today.
Yes, sure.
It was very interesting, Gary. I appreciate and I
Thank you,
I
sir.
like the way this went. I hope people get something out of this. It's only food for thought, no conclusions. Okay? And no dogmas. But I still have to say that 2000 years ago in this country it has been discussed. That's the amazing part.
Yes.
Okay. So, thank you very much. Sarve bhavantu sukhina.
Thank you, sir. Om Shri Guru Bhyo.
Thank you, Ganesh.
Yes.
Thank you.